Billionaire mom sees black waitress feeding her blind daughter. And Sahaja saw life forever. It started on an ordinary Tuesday morning in Manhattan. The rain was steady, the kind that forces people to lower their heads and hurry through life inside a quiet corner cafe. Olivia Hart, one of the wealthiest women in New York, sat alone with her phone, lost in the noise of corporate emails and designer deals. She had everything: money, influence, the world at her feet. But she didn't have time for anyone, not even her own daughter, Lily. As she waited for her assistant, her eyes caught something that made her freeze. Across the cafe, a young black waitress, tired, soaked from the rain, her apron stained with coffee, was kneeling beside a little girl. Olivia squinted. The girl's eyes were unfocused. She was blind. The waitress, instead of rushing off with trays, was gently feeding the child spoon by spoon, smiling between each word of encouragement. Olivia's throat tightened. Something inside her cracked. Because that little girl wasn't just a customer's child. It was her own daughter. Olivia Hart was the kind of woman the world applauded from a distance. Powerful, polished, and perpetually in control. Her name was synonymous with success. She had built an empire out of nothing but ambition and steel, transforming herself from a fresh graduate with ideas into a billionaire whose signature could shift markets. Her image filled magazines, her words filled conferences, and her presence filled rooms with awe. People looked at her and saw perfection, a woman who had conquered everything. But what they didn't see was the emptiness that echoed behind the applause. At home, her mansion stood like a monument to achievement, vast, cold, and silent. The staff spoke in whispers, laughter was rare, and warmth even rarer. Olivia's daughter, Lily, had never known the sound of her mother reading her bedtime stories or the comfort of being tucked in after a long day. From birth, Lily's blindness had been something Olivia didn't know how to face. She hired specialists, therapists, private teachers, everyone who could help her daughter adapt to a world she couldn't see. She paid for everything, except the one thing money couldn't buy: her time. Olivia's schedule ran her life. Meetings, investors, dinners, boardrooms. The rhythm of her existence was dictated by the ticking of profit and prestige. Her phone was her closest companion, and her success was the armor she wore to protect herself from feeling guilt. She told herself she was doing it all for Lily, that every sleepless night, every deal closed, every headline was for her daughter's future. But deep down, she knew it was for something else. She was terrified of slowing down because if she did, she'd have to face the parts of herself she'd buried beneath ambition. Lily, though blind, could see more than anyone gave her credit for. She sensed her mother's absence in the way her footsteps echoed down the hall and vanished. She knew that when her mother said, "I love you," it was always through a doorway halfway out the door. She grew up understanding that love, in their house, came with conditions. It was scheduled, managed, and supervised. Yet despite the loneliness, Lily never blamed her. She would trace her mother's perfume through the air, whispering softly, "At least she was here." That morning in the cafe, Olivia had promised herself she would do better. She'd arranged breakfast with Lily. No meetings, no distractions, just the two of them. But as usual, something came up, a call from Tokyo, a contract that couldn't wait. She told her assistant to watch Lily, said she'd be right back, and hurried out into the rain. Her shoes splashed through puddles, her mind already back in the world of mergers and deadlines. She didn't see the way Lily sat quietly at the table, small hands folded over the napkin, waiting for her mother's voice to return. When Olivia finally walked back into the cafe, the scene she found wasn't what she expected. Her name was Maya, just 23, but her eyes carried the weight of a lifetime. She'd been working at the cafe for nearly 2 years, juggling shifts between there and a night job at a nursing home. Every morning started before dawn. Every night ended long after exhaustion had settled into her bones. Yet, despite the struggle, there was something about her, a quiet strength, a calm that came from having learned how to survive in a world that rarely showed her kindness. She had grown up in the South Bronx, raised by her grandmother after losing her mother to a hospital that turned her away because she didn't have insurance. That memory burned in her every day, not just the pain, but the lesson that humanity often came with conditions. When Maya saw Lily sitting alone that morning, her small hands searching uncertainly for her spoon, something inside her stirred. She didn't see a billionaire's daughter. She saw a child who reminded her of herself, lost in a world too busy to notice her. Without thinking, Maya wiped her hands on her apron and walked over. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said softly. "You hungry?" Lily tilted her head toward the voice, hesitant but trusting. Maya smiled, guided her hand to the plate, and began to feed her slowly, gently describing each bite so Lily could imagine what she was tasting. The cafe was quiet except for the soft clinking of spoons in Maya's calm, patient voice. Some customers glanced over, whispering. A black waitress kneeling beside a rich woman's child wasn't something they were used to seeing. But Maya didn't notice them. She didn't do it for attention. She did it because it was right. In that small act, there was no hierarchy, no class, no color, just one human being caring for another. When Olivia returned, she froze. For a moment, she couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. Her daughter, the one she barely had time for, being fed by a stranger with more tenderness than she had ever shown. The image hit her like a wave. Maya's patience, Lily's small smile, the quiet intimacy of it all. It wasn't pity, it was love, unspoken but powerful. Olivia's chest tightened as something unfamiliar rose inside her, shame. She stepped forward abruptly, the sound of her heels breaking the fragile stillness. Maya looked up, startled but composed. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said quickly. Lily was getting hungry. I didn't want her to struggle. Her voice was soft, respectful, but there was no trace of fear. She spoke with the dignity of someone who'd learned that kindness doesn't make you smaller. Olivia reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the counter. "For your kindness," she said, her tone clipped and formal. The only way she knew how to express gratitude. Maya looked at it, then at her. The tension in her jaw was subtle but unmistakable. "Mom," she said quietly. I didn't feed her for money. The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Olivia left the cafe that morning with a strange heaviness pressing on her chest. The sound of Maya's voice, calm, firm, unapologetic, kept echoing in her mind. I didn't feed her for money. She had meant it so simply, yet the words cut deeper than any insult could. Olivia had spent her whole life surrounded by people who expected something in return for kindness. Deals, favors, partnerships. Everything came with a cost. But Maya's act hadn't been a transaction. It had been genuine, human, and pure. That was what unsettled her most. Her driver spoke once or twice, asking where to go, but Olivia barely heard him. She stared out the window as Manhattan blurred by. Glass towers, luxury stores, people rushing with umbrellas. All symbols of the life she had built. A life that suddenly felt smaller than it ever had. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the image of Maya kneeling beside Lily, spoon in hand, her expression patient and kind. There had been no judgment, no calculation, no recognition of status. Just care. The next morning, she couldn't resist the urge to find out more. She called her assistant, told her to look up the waitress from the cafe. "Her name's Maya," she said, though she wasn't sure why her voice trembled as she spoke it. Within hours, the file was on her desk. It wasn't much, just an address, a few work references, and a note about unpaid medical bills linked to a grandmother named Ruth. Olivia stared at the screen, her throat tightening as she read. A life so far removed from hers, yet so deeply intertwined through a single moment of compassion. By evening, Olivia was sitting in her car outside Maya's apartment in Harlem. She had told herself she was just curious, that she only wanted to understand. But as she watched through the rain-smeared window, she saw something she hadn't expected. Maya, still in her cafe uniform, helping her elderly grandmother into bed. The room was dimly lit, the walls cracked, yet the way Maya moved through that space was filled with grace. She set a bowl of soup on the table, tasted it first to make sure it wasn't too hot, then fed her grandmother with the same tenderness she had shown Lily. Olivia felt her chest tighten. It wasn't pity she felt, it was humility. She realized she had been living in a bubble of privilege so thick, she'd forgotten what real struggle looked like. She'd donated millions to charities, given speeches about empowerment, yet here was a young woman embodying everything Olivia claimed to stand for without cameras or applause. The rain outside grew heavier, and Olivia sat in silence, watching Maya's silhouette move gently through the apartment. For the first time in years, tears rolled down her face, quiet and uninvited. Something inside her began to shift, not from guilt alone, but from recognition. The next morning, Olivia sat in her office on the 47th floor, staring out at the skyline that had once felt like her empire. The city stretched endlessly below her, filled with people she'd never see, stories she'd never know. But all she could think about was Maya, the way she stood in that cafe, unapologetic, grounded, unshaken by wealth or status, had left a mark Olivia couldn't erase. Her world had always been built on control, yet for the first time she felt uncertain. Not about her business or her reputation, but about herself. She picked up the phone and made a call. "Bring her to me," she told her assistant. The tone was commanding, but her heart raced like a guilty child's. Hours later, The elevator doors opened and Maya stepped into a space built to intimidate. Everything gleamed, marble floors, towering windows, abstract art on the walls. Employees moved like shadows, their silence rehearsed. Maya hesitated for only a second before straightening her shoulders and walking forward. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, the same worn shoes from the cafe, and yet she carried herself with quiet dignity that even Olivia's designer suit couldn't match. "Thank you for coming," Olivia said, gesturing toward the chair across from her. Maya nodded politely and sat, her posture respectful but firm. There was a silence between them, not uncomfortable but charged. Olivia studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "I wanted to apologize. For how I handled things, I realized I may have offended you." Maya looked at her calmly, her eyes soft but unflinching. "You didn't offend me, ma'am," she said. "You just don't understand people like me." Olivia blinked, startled by the blunt honesty. "People like you." Maya's lips curved slightly. "People who serve. People who work until their bones ache and still get judged by the color of their skin before anyone knows their name." She didn't say it with anger. She said it like a truth she had repeated too many times to count. Olivia leaned back, unsure how to respond. She had attended diversity panels, sponsored equality programs, but sitting across from Maya made all of that feel like a performance, polished, detached, meaningless. Maya continued, her voice steady. "I didn't feed Lily because she's your daughter. I fed her because she was a child who needed help. I don't care who her mother is. I don't see money when someone's hungry. I see a person." Her words hit Olivia like waves, stripping away every layer of defense she'd built. There was no accusation in Maya's tone, only conviction and compassion. For a moment, Olivia saw the reflection of herself through Maya's eyes, powerful, but distant, respected, but hollow. She took a slow breath, the air heavy with realization. "I've spent my life changing companies," she murmured, more to herself than to Maya, "but maybe I forgot how to change people." Maya met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "With all due respect, Mom," she said softly, "people don't need to be changed. They just need to be seen." Months passed, and the world around Olivia began to look different. The sharp edges of her days softened. The silence of her mansion no longer felt like success, but like a reminder of everything she'd missed. True to her word, she started something new, a foundation in Maya's name, not as an act of charity, but as a symbol of transformation. She called it the Maya Foundation for Equal Vision, a title that made Maya blush when she first heard it. Olivia insisted that Maya lead it, not as a figurehead, but as its heart. She wanted the world to hear Maya's voice, to see through her eyes what it meant to live unseen yet still choose compassion. The launch event was held in the same city where Maya had once struggled to pay rent. Reporters filled the hall, flashing cameras and scribbling notes as they tried to understand why a billionaire CEO would hand the reins of her new foundation to a cafe waitress. When Olivia stepped on stage, she didn't hide behind polished speeches or rehearsed smiles. She looked straight into the cameras and said, "This isn't a gift. It's a correction. I was blind to the truth that money means nothing if it doesn't open doors for others." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Maya didn't just help my daughter eat that day. She helped me see." The room went still. For the first time, people weren't clapping for Olivia's power. They were listening to her humility. Maya stood beside her, nervous but radiant. She wasn't used to attention, yet she spoke with quiet strength. "Equality doesn't begin with policies," she said. "It begins with how we treat the people we think are beneath us." The crowd erupted in applause, but Maya didn't bask in it. She simply smiled and stepped back, her eyes searching for Olivia's. There was a shared understanding between them, one that didn't need words. As weeks turned into months, the foundation began to change lives. They provided scholarships for underprivileged youth, funded health care for those who couldn't afford it, and created safe spaces for people who had been silenced by discrimination. Olivia attended every meeting, not as a leader, but as a learner. She walked through shelters, schools, and hospitals, meeting people whose names would never make the news. For the first time, she listened without the filter of privilege. At home, Lily blossomed. The once distant mother now read to her every night, describing the world in words her daughter could feel. Olivia no longer filled the house with luxury. She filled it with presence. The laughter that had been missing for years returned, gentle and real. Sometimes when she watched Lily smile, she thought of Maya, of the day everything changed, of the rain against the cafe window, of the spoonful of kindness that had broken through a lifetime of walls. The woman who had once defined herself by success now measured her worth by how much good she could quietly do when no one was watching. Sometimes, Life doesn't wake you up with pain, it wakes you up with kindness. Olivia Hart had spent years blind to the truth that wealth doesn't buy worth and power doesn't equal presence. It took a young black waitress, unseen by most, yet shining with grace, to show her what real humanity looked like. The world often divides people by color, class, or title, but beneath all of it, we share one language: compassion. Maya didn't change Olivia's life with a protest or a speech. She changed it with a simple act, feeding a hungry child who wasn't hers. In that moment, she proved something the world forgets, that dignity lives in the smallest gestures, and love doesn't check your bank account before it gives. So the next time you see someone invisible to the world, look again. Because maybe, just maybe, they're the one person who can teach you how to truly see.